The couple who checked into room 6 and never checked out. They checked into room 6 just before dusk, the kind of dusk that makes a highway look like a decision. The sundown motor court sat alone off Route 17 outside Pinefield, North Carolina. 20 cinder block rooms in a crooked row, a neon vacancy that flickered like it needed permission, and a pool out front that hadn't been blue since the county fair still mattered. The clerk on duty, Tyler Reese, wrote their names in the paper ledger because the card reader had started chewing numbers that morning. He remembers their voices, polite, tired, relieved. He remembers the woman's laugh, not big, but clean. He remembers the man asking, "Any rooms without carpet?" and then waving it off. Forget it. Room 6 is fine. Their names were Lucas Hale and Jenna Miles. They were headed to the coast to meet her sister for a weekend she'd been planning since March. They'd left Asheville late because life doesn't ask if you want your alternator to complain. Their silver Subaru pulled into space at 6:58 p.m. On a Thursday, the sun dropping behind the pine line like a curtain. At 7:12, Jenna texted her sister a photo of the motel sign with 3 words, "Made it. Barely." The sister thumbed back a laughing emoji and a rule, "Don't swim." The pool looked like a memory of water, a green mirror for the electrical wires. Inside the room, thin towels, 2 lamps that didn't agree on wattage, an air conditioner that thought it was a train. Jenna kicked off her shoes and Lucas opened the curtains an inch. The TV came up to a game show where people screamed about appliances. He ordered 2 bottled waters and a bag of peanuts from the front desk cash. Tyler brought them at 7:39 and remembers the door chain was set when Jenna opened up. "Thanks," she said, and he thought about saying he liked her sandals, but didn't. At 8:03, a retired math teacher named Ruth McKay in room 5 called the desk to complain about that dragging sound through the wall, like furniture moving. Tyler walked down, knocked on room 6, heard the TV, heard a woman say, "Yeah, 1 sec," and then silence. He stood there a full minute before the chain slid, the door opened 2 inches, and Lucas's eye appeared in the gap. "Sorry," Lucas said, smiling the kind of smile people deploy when they want a stranger to go back to being a stranger. "We're settling in." Tyler apologized. Lucas apologized back. The door closed. The dragging sound stopped. At 9:18, Lucas bought a soda from the machine by the ice. The camera above the vending alcove caught him in profile black jacket, tired posture, exact change, and then the picture dissolved into static for 9 seconds. When it came back, the slot was empty, the dollar return lit, and the soda spiraled down 2 coils late. Tyler stapled a sticky note to the maintenance log and forgot about it. At 10:41, a trucker in room 9 heard the low 2-note whistle people make when they're trying to remember the name of a song. He wrote later that it sounded like it was coming from the courtyard and like it was inside his head. At 11:03, the night clerk, a college kid named Dev, took over for Tyler and shorted the drawer by $4 because he was watching videos with his headphones on and because 28-year-old Dev did not believe motels could keep secrets. At 12:11 a.m., the desk phone blinked. Room 6, 2 rings, hang up. Dev dialed back. It picked up on the first ring. He says he heard TV sound and a woman breathe out like she'd just been surprised, and then the soft click of a receiver returning to its cradle. At 2:19 a.m., 911 got a call from a number that traced to a prepaid burner bought 2 exits west. The recording is 19 seconds long. A man says, "Hello?" and then "wrong room," and then there's a knock in the background and a voice, smaller, saying "no, wait," and the line fills with the sound of a TV turning up, then turning down, then the hiss of air. Dispatch called back 3 times. No answer. And then the part Pinefield can't agree on, sometime between 2:30 and dawn, Lucas and Jenna were gone. At 7:08 a.m., Dev did the morning knock and announce sweep with a clipboard and a hangover. He knocked on 6, no answer. He knocked again. He heard the TV. He tried the knob. It didn't give. He slid the master key into the lock, turned, and felt the catch of a chain still set inside. He bent to the gap, looked through, saw the corner of a suitcase and a TV tuned to a traffic report out of Wilmington. Dev woke Tyler. Tyler knocked with 2 knuckles the way his mother had taught him when there was a baby in the house. Nothing. He told Ruth in room 5 they were on it. He called Mr. Patel, the owner. Mr. Patel arrived in wet hair and a shirt that said golf. He took one look at the chain, sighed, and fetched the bolt cutters. The chain on room 6 was the old style, a slide bar in a brass sheath. Patel spoke to the space, "I'm opening, okay?" and popped the screws because whatever else you can say about him, he believed in giving people a chance to be decent. The door swung 6 inches, then 12, then wide. The room smelled like AC and peanuts. The bed was made, not clean made, occupied made, the way 2 people carelessly pull covers to their chests and leave a suggestion of sleep behind. The suitcase lay open on the luggage rack, with clothes folded by someone who still thought weekends can fix things, 2 phones charging by the lamp, room key on the desk, Jenna's sandals under the chair, the bathroom light on, the shower tile wet, and no one. The bathroom window was painted shut from a renovation that had been a dream and then a budget. The back wall of room 6 had a closet that was a rod and a mirror pretending to be a closet. The ceiling was roll-on texture with a brownish water ring you could spend a morning seeing shapes in. There was no back door. There was no trapdoor. The floor was concrete under carpet that still held the ghost of other people's feet. Pinefield Sheriff's deputies arrived at 7:41, led by a man named Mercer, who had put in 22 years waiting for a case like this without realizing what it would do to him. They taped the door. They photographed the room with patience. They lifted a print off the ice bucket's chrome that matched no one who lived in the county. They found a grocery receipt in the trash for 2 protein bars, 1 bottle of cold brew, and a pack of mint gum time-stamped 5:26 p.m., 30 miles west. They found, under the bed, a single red thread, long as a finger, that did not match the bedspread or the curtains or the clothes in the suitcase. They found nothing that explained how 2 people could be in a locked room with the chain engaged and then be absent from it with the chain still engaged. Mercer pulled motel camera footage. At 6:58 p.m., the Subaru pulled into Space 6. At 7:39, Tyler delivered waters. At 9:18, the soda machine did its 9 seconds of snow. Between midnight and sunrise, the courtyard camera stayed steady. Nobody crossing, nobody leaving, nobody moving, except moths and the ripple of a flag that had never learned to go all the way limp. They canvassed the rooms. Ruth in 5 heard that furniture drag, and later a man say wrong room to someone who didn't answer back. The trucker in 9 heard the whistle. A couple in 11 heard what they thought was a show with too much canned laughter. Dev heard nothing he would swear to. Tyler said he knocked. A polite eye had told him everything was fine. They searched the pool. There were no footprints in the slick algae slick, because algae is not a medium that cares what your feet want to leave behind. They checked the roof, the dew still on it, no sign of anyone running their weight along the edges. They followed the service corridor behind the rooms where the ice machine sweats. It dead-ended at a locked door that no one had a key for because the key had been on a ring that fell into a storm drain 3 owners ago. Patel had to call a guy. The guy came. The door opened on a crawl space, breathing heat from the dryer vents. Dust lay smooth across the ducting like snow. No tracks, no handprints. Only the kind of old smell houses develop if you ask them to hold strangers for decades. At 10:14 a.m., Jenna's sister called the front desk after the couple missed their breakfast check-in. Tyler took the call, handed it to Mercer, and held the receiver while a woman in a car somewhere put the 2 halves of a story together with her voice. He watched Mercer write down words like last text, sandals, Subaru, don't swim, and she said they were tired, but happy. He watched the sheriff's hand hesitate above the ledger where Tyler had written their names. Mercer wrote them again. He drew a line under the date. He said, "We have to assume they left on foot." And not even the most patient deputy in Pinefield believed him. At 1:02 p.m., a clerk at a gas station 40 miles east called in a tip. A woman matching Jenna's description bought 2 bottles of water and a map with cash at 6:20 a.m. The station's cameras, when they worked, wrote everything to a hard drive that died Christmas week 5 years back. The clerk, remembered the sandals. Mercer drove out, bought the same brand of water and the same map, looked at the bills in the drawer, found nothing but the faint smell of fryer oil that knows every shirt it touches. 2 days later, a fisherman reported a Subaru at a boat launch 10 miles south. It wasn't theirs. A week after that, a man in Wilmington said he'd seen Lucas at a diner, eating eggs and not answering to his name. It wasn't him. The case got smaller, the way a room gets smaller, when you can name every object in it, lamp, chair, key, thread, and none of the objects explains the shape of the room. Back at the sundown, Patel shut down room 6 for repairs. Ruth asked for a discount. Dev quit without telling anyone. Tyler worked double shifts because work always looks like an answer when there isn't one. Mercer returned, twice, to stand in the room and stare at the chain bracket he'd unscrewed himself. One afternoon, he noticed 2 gouges in the paint just above the bracket, thin lines, parallel, the length of a door chain slide bar. He measured the gap's angle, he drew on a yellow pad, he fetched a yardstick and a spoon from his own kitchen, and showed one of his deputies how a hand on the outside could, by working the spoon through the gap, lift a slide bar out of its keeper. Then he realized he had proved the opposite problem: how to open a chain door from outside, not how to chain it from within after leaving. He took the ledger home, read the names on the page above Lucas and Jenna like there might be choreography hidden in handwriting. He went back further. 2 summers earlier, a couple out of Raleigh checked into room 6 and left at 5 a.m. without their deposit. 3 winters before that, a contractor stayed for a month and asked to be moved because of pounding through the wall. 10 years back, in a different owner's ledger, someone wrote door, 6 replace latch underlined twice. A ring stain from a coffee mug turned the note into a target. There is a story locals tell now because people need a way to store fear that makes it stackable. It goes like this. There's a second door in room 6, or a hole behind the dresser, or a duct big enough for a person in a good mood, or a laundry truck takes 2 people wrapped like mattresses past a clerk wearing headphones. It changes depending on who's telling it and whether they want heroes or villains. Some versions say you can hear the whistle in the courtyard at 2:33 if you stand very still. Some say you can see the chain swing on its own when the AC kicks, like a breath. What Pinefield doesn't say out loud is the thing Mercer wrote once on a memo to himself and then folded into his wallet. Someone knocked on the wrong door and nobody opened it, or someone knocked on the right door and it was room 6. Months later, Patel tried reopening the room. The first guest lasted one night. She left a note at the desk in neat teacher print. The TV changed channels at 2:19 a.m. I didn't touch the remote. The room is clean but feels used. She underlined feels. Patel hired a painter to cover the water ring on the ceiling. They moved the bed. The ring reappeared. Not bigger. Darker. As if it had remembered where it belonged. Jenna's sister still calls Mercer on her bad days, which are most days. He picks up even when he has nothing new to say. He tells her the truth, that credit cards sit unread, that phones and evidence don't dial, that a single red thread is not a map, that the last thing anyone can prove about Lucas and Jenna is that they were tired and grateful and polite to a clerk carrying 2 bottled waters. He doesn't tell her about the 911 call that says wrong room because he doesn't know if it's a clue or a coincidence or a ghost of a voice riding a wire at night when wires do what they want. If you drive Route 17 after dark, the sundown motor court still blinks its apology at passing trucks. Room 6's curtain is kept shut now, even when someone's in there. If you ask Tyler about that couple, he will try to make a joke about chain brackets and bolt cutters, and he will fail. If you ask Mercer, he'll say the case is open because some doors don't close the way paperwork hopes they will. And if you stand in the courtyard just before dawn and listen, really listen, you'll hear what Pinefield has learned to live with. A TV somewhere too loud for that hour, a 2-note whistle, the soft, careful drag of furniture, and the sound a chain makes when it thinks it's doing its job, while the room quietly decides to let someone in. The camera saw what her eyes couldn't. All right, folks, settle in. Grab a hot drink, maybe pull that blanket a little tighter, because tonight we're diving into a story that's a classic blend of strange, dark, and mysterious. It's a tale that challenges our very perception of reality an account that comes to us from the deep shadowed hollows of the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. A place where the hills hold secrets, and sometimes those secrets refuse to stay buried. This isn't about what your eyes think they see. No, this is about what a cold, unblinking lens can capture, something her eyes never could. Our protagonist in this unsettling narrative is a woman named Chloe. Chloe was a freelance web designer, a creative soul who loved the solitude that rural living offered. She had recently purchased a small rustic cabin tucked away down a long, winding gravel road, surrounded by ancient, towering trees. The cabin was old, with a wide, inviting front porch, a stone fireplace, and windows that peered into a seemingly endless expanse of dense forest. She relished the quiet, the crisp mountain air, the feeling of being truly disconnected from the relentless hum of the city. It was her sanctuary, a place where she felt she could finally breathe. Initially, her life in the cabin was everything she had dreamed of. Peaceful mornings, productive workdays, and evenings spent under a canopy of countless stars. She had a small dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Rusty, who was her constant companion, always trotting happily beside her on their daily walks through the woods. Then, things started to feel off. It began subtly, as these things often do. A faint whisper of air, a sudden chill in a perfectly warm room. Chloe would be working at her desk, engrossed in a design, and she'd feel a strange, fleeting draft even with all the windows and doors securely closed. Rusty, usually a boisterous and fearless little dog, would sometimes whine softly, staring intently at an empty corner of the room, his hackles slightly raised. Chloe would dismiss it as the old house settling or Rusty reacting to a squirrel outside. She was, after all, a rational person. But the incidents became more frequent, more insistent. A cupboard door she swore she had closed would be slightly ajar. A book she had left on her nightstand would be on the floor the next morning. Small, easily explainable things on their own, but together they formed a pattern of subtle, unsettling disruption. Chloe started to feel a prickle of unease, a sense that she wasn't quite alone even when Rusty was asleep at her feet. One particularly blustery evening, a strong gust of wind unlatched her back porch door, causing it to swing open with a bang. While nothing was stolen, the incident unnerved her enough to finally invest in a proper security system. She purchased a set of high-definition, motion-activated cameras, placing one on her front porch, one overlooking the backyard, and one inside the main living area, positioned to capture the entryway and a good portion of the main room. She felt a sense of relief once they were installed, a practical solution to her growing unease. The cameras hummed to life, silent sentinels watching over her cabin. For a few uneventful days, they only captured Rusty chasing squirrels or Chloe herself walking through the frame. She started to relax, convinced that her anxieties had simply been amplified by the isolation. Then, one Monday morning, as she reviewed the overnight footage, she saw it. It was from the living room camera, time-stamped at precisely 1:47 a.m. Rusty was asleep on his dog bed, snoring softly. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the moon filtering through the windows. And then, a fleeting distortion. Just at the very edge of the frame, near the archway leading to the kitchen, a quick, shadowy blur darted from right to left. It was so fast, so indistinct, that if she hadn't been reviewing the footage frame by frame, she would have missed it entirely. It was darker than the shadows, faster than any animal she knew, and yet it seemed to have a human-like form, albeit elongated and impossibly swift. Chloe's heart leaped into her throat. She replayed it, again and again, slowing the footage down as much as possible. It was still a blur, but undeniably there. It moved with a jerky, almost unnatural fluidity. Not a bug, not dust on the lens. Something moved, in her living room, in the dead of night, while she and Rusty slept. And her eyes had seen absolutely nothing at the time. She spent the entire day trying to debunk it. She checked the camera settings, adjusted the motion sensitivity, even watched the same spot in the room for hours, trying to recreate the lighting conditions. Nothing. Her logical mind screamed for a rational explanation, but she couldn't find one. The footage was clear, the anomaly was there, and her own perception had completely missed it. The incidents continued, but only the cameras saw them. Every night, in the early morning hours, usually between 1:30 a.m. and 2:00 a.m., the cameras would capture something. Sometimes it was that fleeting, shadowy blur darting across the room. Other times, it was a subtle flicker in the light, a momentary darkening that the human eye would register as nothing, but the camera's unblinking lens recorded with chilling precision. Rusty would often be captured on film, whimpering in his sleep, or suddenly waking and staring intently at the exact spot where the camera had just recorded an anomaly. Chloe's own eyes, however, never saw anything in real time. She'd wake to Rusty's low growl, look up, and see an empty room. But the camera knew. The consistency of the time was the most unsettling aspect. Always in that narrow window, just before 2:00 a.m. It felt like a scheduled performance, a nightly haunting that only the cold digital eye of the camera was privy to. Chloe started losing significant sleep, her creative work suffered, she looked perpetually tired, her eyes constantly darting around the room, even in broad daylight. She was a prisoner in her own cabin, dreading the approach of night, knowing that unseen things were stirring in her home, captured only by the silent witnesses mounted on her walls. She knew it sounded insane. She knew anyone she told would think she was imagining things, that the isolation was getting to her. But the footage, the undeniable, horrifying footage, that was her proof. Finally, at the end of her rope, Chloe called her best friend, a no-nonsense photographer named Marcus. Marcus was a skeptic by nature, but also deeply loyal to Chloe. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed, as Chloe recounted the strange occurrences, her voice barely a whisper, her laptop open to display the chilling video clips. "Chloe?" he said. Finally, his voice carefully neutral, "This looks odd. It could be a trick of the light, lens flare, anything. But the consistency is definitely unsettling." He picked up his own professional camera, a high-end model with advanced low-light capabilities. "I'll stay a few nights. We'll set up some of my gear, maybe a different angle, different lenses. Will show us something else, or nothing at all." Marcus, despite his skepticism, felt a prickle of unease as he set up his gear. He placed cameras with infrared capabilities, motion sensors, and even a thermal camera, all pointed at the areas where Chloe's system had recorded anomalies. He wasn't going to let his friend suffer alone, even if it was just her imagination. That first night, Marcus settled onto the sofa, his professional cameras recording silently, their red indicator lights blinking faintly. He brought a notebook, determined to document every creak, every shadow. He heard Chloe pacing softly upstairs. The cabin was utterly still, the only sound the soft hum of his equipment. He checked his watch. 1:40 a.m. A nervous energy began to settle over him. He was looking directly at the archway to the kitchen, the very spot where Chloe's camera had captured the clearest anomaly. He strained his eyes, trying to pierce the gloom. Nothing. Just the familiar lines of the old cabin. And then, precisely at 1:47 a.m., Marcus felt it. A sudden, profound drop in temperature right beside him, as if a large block of ice had materialized out of thin air. He shivered violently, his breath misting in the cold. His thermal camera, he knew, would be picking up a significant change. He glanced at the monitor for his thermal camera. A distinct, cold patch, shaped vaguely like a human form, had just appeared near the kitchen archway, then vanished. He hadn't seen anything with his eyes, not a single thing. But the temperature drop was undeniable, and the thermal camera, it had seen. He stood up, his heart pounding. The coldness dissipated as quickly as it had arrived. He walked to the archway, sweeping the empty space with his eyes. Nothing, just the familiar, comforting shadows. He returned to his sofa, shaken to his core. He hadn't seen the shadowy blur that Chloe had captured, but he had felt its cold presence, and his cameras, they had recorded it. The next morning, Marcus was as pale and shaken as Chloe often was. He showed her the thermal footage, the distinct, chilling drop in temperature, the fleeting, cold form. "My eyes saw nothing, Chloe," he said, his voice hushed. "But the camera saw the cold. Together, they delved into the history of the cabin and the land. They visited the local archives, old newspaper clippings, and spoke to the few longtime residents who remembered the area from decades past. They were looking for something, anything, that could explain the phenomenon. They found it. A tragic, almost forgotten tale from nearly a century ago. The cabin had once belonged to a family, the Andersons. They had a young daughter, Lily, who loved to play in the surrounding woods. One late autumn day, Lily went missing. A massive search was launched, involving nearly everyone in the small community. Days turned into weeks, but Lily was never found. Her parents, heartbroken and consumed by grief, eventually left the cabin, unable to bear the memories. The local legend was that Lily had simply vanished into the woods, never to be seen again. Some older residents whispered that she had been playing hide-and-seek and simply got too good at hiding. The most chilling detail they uncovered, however, came from an old, yellowed police report from the missing persons case. It detailed the initial findings, the search efforts, and the last known time Lily was seen. A neighbor who had been chatting with Lily's mother on the porch recalled seeing Lily playing near the kitchen window, just inside the house. The neighbor had glanced at her watch, noting the time, before Lily darted out of sight. The time: 1:47 a.m. Chloe and Marcus stared at the report, a cold dread washing over them. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. The fleeting shadow, the consistent time, the chilling cold. It wasn't a malicious entity. It was Lily, forever playing hide-and-seek in her old home, forever darting through the rooms, just out of sight, just beyond human perception. The camera wasn't picking up a ghost, perhaps. It was picking up the residual energy of a child, forever trapped in a moment of playful innocence, forever trying to be seen. Chloe couldn't live there anymore. The cabin, once her sanctuary, now felt like a lonely playground for a lost child. She sold it, not daring to mention the camera footage or the chilling history to the new owners. She just wanted to escape the constant unseen presence. She lives in a new apartment now, in a bustling city, surrounded by people and constant noise. She has no security cameras inside her home. She sleeps soundly, undisturbed by fleeting shadows or unexplained chills. But sometimes, when the silence of the night is particularly deep, she'll wake for no reason, a cold sweat on her brow. She'll glance at her clock, and if it's anywhere near 1:47 a.m., she can almost feel it. Not the cold, not a whisper, but the faint childlike energy of someone playing a game just out of sight. And she wonders if Lily, in that old cabin deep in the West Virginia mountains, is still darting through the rooms, and if, somewhere, a new owner's camera, unblinking and patient, is still capturing what her eyes couldn't. So, what do you think happened to Lily? Was she truly lost to the woods, her playful spirit forever bound to her home? Or was it something more, something that uses innocence as a way to linger? Leave your theories in the comments below. And if this story made you think twice about what your own security cameras might be seeing, hit that like button and subscribe for more strange, dark, and mysterious tales. Good night, everyone, and remember, not everything that moves can be seen. Never look out the window after midnight. The new apartment was meant to be an upgrade. Bigger, brighter, and most importantly, with a view. My old place had faced a brick wall. This one, on the 7th floor of a converted warehouse, overlooked a sprawling, poorly lit park that stretched to the river. At night, it was a vast expanse of dark trees and deeper shadows, punctuated by the occasional distant street lamp, a lone, glowing eye in the urban wilderness. I imagined peaceful evenings, watching the stars, feeling connected to something larger than myself. I moved in mid-autumn, the air crisp, the leaves turning. The first few weeks were everything I'd hoped for. I'd finish work, make myself tea, and sit by the large living room window, mesmerized by the quiet dance of the city lights reflecting on the distant river. I slept well, undisturbed by the usual city noises, lulled by the sheer distance from the street. The rule about not looking out the window after midnight wasn't one I consciously made. It was one that slowly, insidiously, formed itself around me, like a web spun from 1,000 tiny threads of unease. It started with the streetlight. There was one particularly old, flickering lamp deep in the park, barely visible through the canopy of trees. Sometimes, late at night, after I'd turned off all the lights and was winding down for bed, I'd glance out. The lamp would flicker, then settle. Just a faulty bulb, I told myself. Old wiring. It happened. Then, the flickering became more pronounced. Not just a random stutter, but a series of quick, purposeful blinks, like a coded message. I'd watch, mesmerized, as it would blink twice, pause, then 3 times, then once. Always the same pattern. I'd rationalize it, power surge, wind, whatever. But a cold knot of curiosity, mingled with something less definable, began to form in my stomach. One Tuesday night, I was reading, procrastinating sleep. My clock read 12, 7 a.m. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of my refrigerator. I looked out, almost reflexively. The park was a sea of black, the trees like jagged teeth against the bruised sky. And there, near the flickering streetlight, a shadow. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was too tall, too thin, a wavering column of darker-than-darkness that seemed to defy the ambient gloom. It stood perfectly still, directly under the lamp, absorbing its light rather than reflecting it. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the branches of a tree playing a cruel visual game. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. It was still there, motionless, waiting. I pulled the curtain shut with a violent yank, my hands trembling, my heart hammered against my ribs. I spent the rest of the night huddled in bed, the blankets pulled up to my chin, every creak of the building sounding like footsteps, every distant siren a harbinger of doom. I told myself it was exhaustion, my mind playing tricks. It was just a tree. Just a tree. The next night, I avoided the window. I kept the curtains drawn, played music louder than usual, and went to bed early, determined to break the cycle. I woke at 2:40 a.m., drenched in a cold sweat, my mind filled with the lingering echo of a nightmare I couldn't quite remember. The first thing I did was check the clock. Then, against every fiber of my being, against the fear that still clung to me from the dream, I opened a sliver of the curtain and looked out. The park was still dark. The distant streetlight was still flickering its strange pattern, and directly under it, the shadow stood. It hadn't moved. It was still there, waiting. And this time, I felt something new, something that made my blood run cold. The distinct sensation of being watched. Not just by the shadow, but by everything out there. The trees, the darkness, the very air itself seemed to turn its gaze on my window. I snapped the curtain shut again, but it was too late. The seed of dread had been planted, watered, and was now taking root. I was no longer a casual observer. I was being observed. I began to develop a ritual. Before midnight, I'd pull the heavy blackout curtains tight, ensuring not even a sliver of light could escape or enter. I'd turn off all the lights in my living room, plunge the space into absolute darkness before retreating to my bedroom. It was a desperate attempt to sever the connection, to make myself invisible. But it knew. One night, after meticulously securing the curtains, I went to bed. I must have fallen asleep because I woke with a jolt at 1:15 a.m. The room was cold, unnaturally so. And from the living room, from the direction of the large window, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Not from beneath the floor, not from the walls, but from the window itself, like a fingernail tapping against the glass. My heart seized. I lay motionless, paralyzed by terror. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, matching the beat of my own frantic pulse. Tap, tap, tap. It knew I was awake. It knew I was listening. It knew I was hiding. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened to the incessant tapping, the sound echoing in the cavern of my fear, until the first hint of pre-dawn light began to seep under my bedroom door. The tapping ceased abruptly, leaving a void of silence that felt even heavier than the noise. The next morning, I checked the window. Nothing. No marks, no condensation, nothing to indicate anything had touched the glass. The curtains were still perfectly drawn. It was all in my head, I told myself. A symptom of stress, of living alone, of too much imagination. But the terror was too real, the tapping too distinct. I called my sister Clara. "My apartment's doing weird things," I said, trying to sound casual, trying to make it a joke. I think I'm just overtired. Seeing things. She listened patiently, then suggested I come stay with her for a few days, a change of scenery. I agreed, eagerly. Anything to escape the oppressive silence, the watchful darkness, the relentless tapping. Staying at Clara's was a temporary reprieve. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, surrounded by the comforting sounds of her bustling household. But even there, at the back of my mind, a tiny tendril of dread remained. I found myself instinctively avoiding windows after dark, pulling blinds just in case. After 3 days, I returned to my apartment, feeling marginally refreshed, armed with a renewed sense of rationality. I told myself I wouldn't give in to fear. I would confront it, whatever it was. That night, I decided to keep the curtains open. I would stare it down. Midnight came. I sat on my couch, a book open in my lap, my eyes fixed on the park outside. The distant streetlight flickered its usual pattern. The trees swayed in the gentle breeze. Nothing. No shadow. No tapping. Just the quiet, empty park. Relief began to wash over me, a warm current of self-vindication. I had imagined it all. 12:15 a.m. Still nothing. I started to relax, my muscles unclenching. Maybe I was finally getting over it. 12:30 a.m. My eyelids grew heavy, the book slipped from my grasp. I fought against the creeping exhaustion, desperate to stay awake, to prove myself wrong, to prove it wrong. 12:45 a.m. My head slumped. I must have dozed off, just for a moment, a fleeting dip into unconsciousness. I woke with a suffocating jolt, my breath caught in my throat. The room was colder than before, and from outside, directly beyond my window, I heard a sound. Not a tap, not a growl. It was a soft, wet slurp. A sickening, deliberate sound like something large and gelatinous moving slowly over a smooth surface. It was so close, I could almost feel the vibration of it against the glass. My eyes snapped open, wide with terror. I scrambled to my feet, my legs wobbly, and stared at the window. The park was still dark. But directly outside my 7th-story window, pressed against the glass, was a faint, glistening smear. It was translucent, slightly amber, and impossibly large, covering almost a third of the pane. It pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, with a slow, organic rhythm. And in the center of that smear, a single, perfectly round, unblinking black eye stared back at me. It was dull, ancient, and utterly without emotion. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore from my throat, shattering the silence of the night. I stumbled backward, tripping over the coffee table, sending books and mugs crashing to the floor. My eyes remained fixed on that eye, that impossible, indifferent eye. It blinked slowly, then another wet slurp echoed as the smear seemed to contract slightly, pulling back. I fled the apartment that night. I didn't pack, I didn't lock the door, I just ran. Down the 7 flights of stairs, out into the deserted street, my bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. I didn't stop until I reached Clara's apartment, bursting through her door, incoherent with terror. Now, I live in a different city, in a ground-floor apartment with no windows that face anything but a solid brick wall. I keep the blinds permanently drawn, and I have a pathological fear of glass. I sleep with a dozen lights on, and I never, ever turn them off. The sound of traffic, of sirens, of human voices is a constant, necessary balm. But sometimes, when I'm alone, and the city finally quiets down, and the hands of the clock creep past midnight, I hear it. A faint, distant tap, 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 a soft, wet slurp, and the chilling, undeniable sensation of an ancient, unblinking eye staring at me, through the brick, through the drywall, through my very soul. Never look out the window after midnight, because some things aren't meant to be seen, and some things, once they see you, never forget. He shouldn't have looked under the bed. The apartment was perfect. Or, what passed for perfect in my budget. A 3rd-floor walk-up in an old building, tucked away on a side street where the city's roar softened to a distant hum. High ceilings, hardwood floors that creaked with the weight of decades, and a single large bedroom window that looked out onto a forgotten patch of overgrown communal garden. It was cheap, quiet, and mine. A fresh start after a particularly messy breakup, a place where I could finally just be. Leo, my roommate from college, had helped me move in. As we wrestled my ancient mattress up the narrow stairs, he'd joked, "Looks like the kind of place where things go bump in the night." I'd laughed it off. I was a rational man, a software engineer. Ghosts, ghouls, things under the bed, they were for bad horror movies and children's nightmares. Not for me. Not anymore. I'd left those kinds of fears behind with my childhood. For the first few weeks, the apartment was indeed a sanctuary. The silence was deep, comforting, a stark contrast to the relentless noise of my previous life. I worked long hours, ordered takeout, devoured entire seasons of shows, and slept like a log. My bed, a simple frame with just enough clearance for a few storage boxes, felt secure, a personal island in the calm ocean of my new life. It was a haven, a place of peace. The first hint of something amiss was so minor, I almost didn't register it. I was lying in bed one Tuesday night, scrolling through my phone, lost in a labyrinth of social media, when I heard a soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. It seemed to come from directly beneath my mattress. I pulled out my earbuds, the sudden silence of the room amplifying the faint sound. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was the pipes, the old building settling into its nightly rhythm, or maybe even a loose spring in the bed frame, a minor defect in my well-worn mattress. I shifted, propped myself up, and checked under the bed with my phone's flashlight. Nothing. Just the inevitable dust bunnies I'd yet to conquer, a forgotten socks, and my stack of unopened moving boxes still waiting to be unpacked. I shrugged, a flicker of irritation, put my earbuds back in, and soon drifted off, dismissing the incident entirely. The tapping returned the next night. And the night after that. It was always subtle, never loud enough to truly jolt me awake from a deep sleep, but insistent. A persistent rhythm, like a tiny, unseen hand drumming lightly against the floorboards directly below where my head lay, a silent, relentless metronome. It only happened when I was already in bed, when the lights were out, and when the apartment was otherwise completely silent, the city's hum finally receding. If I so much as moved, or reached for my phone, or even consciously focused on it, it would cease immediately, only to resume once I was perfectly still again, my body relaxed, my mind beginning to wander. It was a game, a cruel, passive-aggressive one, and it was starting to fray my nerves, chipping away at my hard-won tranquility. I started leaving the lights on, a childish attempt to ward off the unseen, but the tapping persisted, a silent defiance of the artificial brightness. It was as if the light merely highlighted the exact spot from which the sound emanated, making it even more pronounced in my mind. I tried to ignore it, to lull myself to sleep through sheer force of will, reciting mental lists, focusing on my breathing, but the sound had become a focal point for my anxiety. My sleep, once so restorative, became fractured, punctuated by moments of intense, unsettling awareness, my mind constantly on edge, waiting for the next tap. My rational explanations began to feel flimsy, transparent, unable to hold against the insidious intrusion. Pipes didn't stop when you moved. Loose springs didn't play a rhythmic beat that paused at your attention. Then the feeling began. A subtle, almost imperceptible pressure on the mattress, just at the very edge, near the foot of the bed. It wasn't the weight of a person. Not exactly. More like a cat jumping onto the bed, a fleeting depression, or a heavy book being placed there, but lighter, softer, more insidious. But there was no cat. No book. It was an indentation in the mattress that I could feel beneath my leg or hip, but never see when I glanced down. I'd lie there, rigid, my breath held, every nerve ending screaming, sensing the faint dip, the subtle shift in the springs, the fabric stretching. And it would always be accompanied by the tapping, now slightly softer, closer, muffled, as if whatever was making the sound had moved from the floor to the underside of the bed frame itself, or even nestled between the springs and the mattress. I considered buying a new bed, a solid platform frame, with no space underneath, thinking to deny it access, to seal off its domain. But a chilling thought stopped me mid-search. If I closed off the space, what if whatever was there suddenly had nowhere to go? What if it was trapped, forced into the room, no longer content with its hidden perch? Or worse, what if it was forced onto the bed, into my immediate space, no longer a hidden presence but an undeniable tactile horror? The idea made my stomach clench, a wave of cold dread washing over me. It was a ridiculous thought, I told myself, a testament to my sleep-deprived imagination and too many late-night documentaries. Yet, I couldn't shake it. The platform bed remained unpurchased. My friends noticed the change. I was constantly tired, my eyes shadowed with dark circles, my skin sallow, a nervous edge to my laugh that hadn't been there before. "You look like you're seeing ghosts, man." Leo joked, completely unaware of the horrifying irony. I just forced a brittle smile and muttered something about long hours, a particularly demanding project at work, the general grind of adulting. How could I explain what was happening? How could I tell them that my bed, the very symbol of comfort and rest, had become a source of creeping dread, a nightly stage for an unseen tormentor? They'd think I was crazy. The tapping grew bolder. It wasn't just a gentle drum anymore. Sometimes it would be a distinct scratch, 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 like elongated fingernails dragging across rough wood, a sound that made my teeth ache. Other times, a soft thump, as if something heavy, but not too heavy, was bumping deliberately against the underside of the mattress directly below my spine or against the headboard where my skull rested. I started sleeping on my stomach, then on my side, trying to put as much distance between myself and the underside of the bed as possible, a futile exercise, but the sounds seemed to follow, shifting their point of origin to match my position, a malevolent dance. It knew where I was. It always knew. The fear wasn't just about the sounds or the sensations anymore. It was about the intent. It felt like something was deliberately tormenting me, observing my reactions, learning my habits, charting my breaking points. It knew when I was awake, when I was trying to sleep, when I was still, and when I was finally slipping into the vulnerable abyss of unconsciousness. And it seemed to take a perverse pleasure in pushing me to the brink, savoring my growing terror, feeding on my dwindling sanity. One particularly awful night, I had a nightmare. I was falling, endlessly, through absolute darkness, the feeling of crushing pressure on my chest, suffocating me, stealing my air, stealing my will. I woke with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room was black, the city lights outside drowned by a thick, soupy fog that clung to the window pane, and from directly under my bed, a low, guttural growl reverberated through the mattress, a sound that vibrated through every bone in my body, from my teeth to my toes. It wasn't loud, not a roar, but it was deep, resonant, and unmistakably malevolent, ancient, and filled with an unspeakable hunger. It wasn't pipes, it wasn't settling wood, it was alive. And it was angry. That was the night I lost it. The rational dam I had painstakingly built over weeks, months, years, shattered into a million tiny pieces. I scrambled off the bed, stumbling blindly into the corner of the room, my legs tangled, my hands fumbling frantically for the light switch. When the harsh overhead light finally flooded the room, dispelling the oppressive darkness, I stared at the space under my bed, half expecting to see a monstrous shape, something grotesque and terrifying, a creature from the deepest nightmares made real. But there was nothing. Just the dust, the boxes, the empty space, looking utterly mundane, utterly innocent. The growl had ceased. The silence that followed was mocking, a triumphant, chilling quiet that echoed in the aftermath of my terror. I spent the rest of the night on the living room couch, huddled under a thick blanket, shaking uncontrollably, every nerve-ending frayed. I couldn't go back to that room. The very thought made me sick, nauseous with fear. I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that whatever was under my bed was real, and it was waiting for me to return, to lie down, to be vulnerable. The next morning, driven by a desperate, all-consuming need for answers, for proof that I wasn't just losing my mind, I started pulling things out from under the bed. Boxes, old clothes, a forgotten pair of sneakers from years ago. With each item I removed, the feeling of dread intensified, A heavy, oppressive weight in the air, a cold, unseen presence breathing down my neck. My hands trembled as I cleared the last box. The space beneath the bed, now completely empty, bathed in the pale, unforgiving morning light that seemed to expose nothing. I knelt, flashlight in hand, my heart hammering, and peered into the darkness, my eyes scanning every inch of the floorboards. There was nothing. No hidden panel, no secret crawlspace, no forgotten toy, no sign of forced entry. Just the clean, dusty floorboards, the unmarred underside of the bed frame, and the impenetrable shadows that clung to the farthest reaches. For a moment, a wave of profound, exhausted relief washed over me. It had all been in my head. I was just overtired. But then, as I began to stand up, my gaze lingered on a small section of the floorboard directly beneath where my head usually rested. There, etched into the dark-aged wood, was a single, perfect finger-shaped indent. Not a scratch, not a gouge, but a smooth, shallow depression, as if something had rested its finger there, pressing down with immense, patient force, day after day, night after night. And right next to it, almost invisible against the grain, were 3 faint, parallel lines, too perfectly spaced to be accidental, like the very tip of a fingernail had been dragged across the wood, over and over again in a rhythmic, deliberate pattern. The tapping, the scratching, the physical manifestation of its presence, carved into the very foundation of my sanctuary. My breath hitched, my heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't just under the bed, it was part of the bed. Or it was claiming the space, marking its territory, leaving its indelible signature. And then, as I stared at those marks, the faint, musty smell of old earth and damp stone, the same smell I'd felt when the cold breath drifted over my face, filled my nostrils, thick and cloying, a taste of grave dust on my tongue. I don't remember screaming, but a distant, raw, animalistic sound vibrated in my ears, echoing the one I'd heard in the dark. I scrambled away from the bed, from the marks, from the smell, from the terrifying knowledge, hitting my head on the bedside table in my haste, a sharp, meaningless pain. The room spun, my vision blurred, tears of terror and despair blurring the edges of the horrifying truth. I moved out that day. I left everything, the furniture, the boxes, the mattress itself, a sacrifice to the unseen. I didn't care about the deposit, the cost, the hassle of starting over from scratch. I just needed to be out. I walked away from that apartment, from that building, without a single glance back. The image of those marks burned into my mind, a permanent scar on my perception of reality. Now, I live in a new city, hundreds of miles away, in a brightly lit apartment building with no space under the bed, just a solid platform that sits flush with the floor, sealed off from any lurking horror. I sleep with all the lights on, a small nightlight glowing in the corner, and a podcast playing softly through the night, a constant stream of human chatter. The sound of human voices, even artificial ones, is a comfort, a shield against the silence, against the thoughts that still try to creep in. But sometimes, when the podcast runs out, or the nightlight flickers, and the artificial quiet descends, I feel it. The faint, undeniable pressure on my mattress, a fleeting dip that shouldn't be there, the distant, rhythmic tap-tap-tap that vibrates not in the room but in the deepest parts of my mind, and the low, resonant growl that seems to echo not from beneath my bed, but from somewhere deep within my own bones, a part of me now. He shouldn't have looked under the bed. Because once you see, once you know, there's no unseeing it. There's no unknowing. And sometimes, the very act of seeking proof is the only invitation it needs to truly enter your world, to leave its mark and never, ever leave. The baby monitor picked up a voice that wasn't their child. The house on Willow Creek Lane had been a dream come true for Sarah and Mark. A 2-story colonial with a sprawling backyard, nestled in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. It was perfect for their growing family, especially with little Lily, their precious 6-month-old, taking up residence in the nursery upstairs. The move had been hectic, a whirlwind of boxes and baby gear, but the promise of a peaceful life made every effort worth it. Mark, ever the pragmatist, insisted on a top-of-the-line baby monitor. "Peace of mind," he'd said, plugging in the sleek white device. "We'll hear every gurgle, every sigh. Sarah, still a little anxious about leaving Lily in her own room for the first time, agreed. The monitor, with its clear audio and crisp video feed, became their tether to their daughter's slumber. For weeks, it worked flawlessly, a comforting presence on their bedside table, broadcasting the soft, rhythmic sounds of Lily's peaceful sleep. The first incident was so minor, Sarah almost dismissed it. It was late, past midnight, and Lily had been asleep for hours. Mark was snoring softly beside her. Sarah, however, was restless, mind still replaying snippets of her busy day. The monitor on her nightstand glowed faintly, displaying a static image of Lily's crib. Then, a sound. A soft, almost imperceptible click. It wasn't Lily, it sounded like a switch, a small mechanical shift. Sarah frowned, listening harder. Nothing. Just Lily's steady breathing, a tiny, reassuring hiss from the speaker. She decided it was just the monitor adjusting, or perhaps interference from a nearby device. She rolled over, trying to sleep. The clicks became a nightly occurrence, always after midnight, always when the house was utterly silent. Sometimes it was a single click, sometimes a series of rapid, almost impatient ones. Mark, a heavy sleeper, never heard it. Sarah, however, became acutely aware of it. It would rouse her from a light sleep, leaving her disoriented and vaguely uneasy. She'd check the monitor, confirm Lily was sleeping soundly, and eventually drift back off, blaming her own sensitivity. Then, the whispers began. They were so faint at first, Sarah thought she was dreaming. A soft, breathy murmur, like wind through dry leaves, barely audible above Lily's gentle breathing. It wasn't a language she recognized, just a soft, indistinct murmuring that seemed to ebb and flow, always from Lily's room. Her heart would pound, a frantic drum against her ribs. She'd lean closer to the monitor, trying to decipher the sounds, but the moment she focused, they would vanish, replaced by the familiar quiet of a sleeping baby. One Tuesday night, a particularly vivid whisper pierced through the monitor. It wasn't just a murmur this time, it was a distinct, albeit distorted, voice. It was low, raspy, and seemed to stretch out its words, each syllable elongated and strange. Sarah sat bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror. This wasn't Lily, this wasn't Mark. This wasn't any voice she knew. She nudged Mark awake, her hand shaking. "Mark, did you hear that?" Mark groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what, honey?" "Lily's fine." He glanced at the monitor, its screen showing Lily peacefully dreaming. "The voice! On the monitor!" Sarah insisted, her voice a desperate whisper. "It wasn't Lily. It was something else." Mark listened for a moment, then sighed. "Probably just interference, Sarah. You're overtired. You're hearing things." He tried to sound reassuring, but his dismissive tone only amplified her fear. He turned over, already drifting back to sleep. Sarah lay awake, rigid with terror, listening to the static hum of the monitor, waiting for the voice to return. It didn't, not that night. But it did. Every night. The voice became clearer, more defined, though still distorted, as if speaking through water. It was always a low, gravelly whisper, sometimes seeming to sing a lullaby that was profoundly unsettling, sometimes muttering what sounded like a string of nonsensical words. It always happened between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., the hours of deepest night, and it always stopped the moment Sarah moved, or made a sound, or even just focused too intently on the monitor. It was aware of her. It knew she was listening. Sarah started recording the monitor's audio on her phone. She filled entire nights with hours of static, Lily's breathing, and then the undeniable, chilling presence of that voice. She played the recordings for Mark, hoping the undeniable proof would make him believe her. Mark listened, his face paling as the raspy whispers filled their bedroom. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Okay, that's not right." He tried to clean the monitor, moved it to a different outlet, even bought a new, more expensive one. Nothing changed. The clicks persisted. The whispers continued. The voice, always the same, always speaking to their sleeping child. They called the baby monitor company. The technician, after listening to their frantic explanation, suggested it was likely a frequency bleed from a nearby device, perhaps a walkie-talkie or an old radio. He offered to send a replacement, but the tone in his voice suggested he'd heard stranger things. The new monitor arrived. It, too, picked up the voice. Sarah started barricading Lily's door at night, pushing a heavy armchair against it. She installed a nightlight in the nursery, chasing away the shadows. She even started sleeping in Lily's room on a small cot, but the whispers would still seep into her dreams, a horrifying lullaby. Mark, though disturbed, clung to rationality. "It's just audio interference, Sarah. We have to be logical." But logic was failing them. The voice grew bolder. One night, as Sarah lay in the cot next to Lily's crib, feigning sleep, she heard it. Not from the monitor, but from the room itself. A soft, wet slurp, followed by a low, guttural chuckle that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Her eyes flew open. Lily was sleeping soundly. The nightlight cast a gentle glow over the room. Nothing. Yet, the sound had been undeniable. Mark began to change too. His easygoing nature gave way to a constant, watchful tension. He'd jump at shadows, flinch at unexpected noises. He stopped snoring. Every night they lay awake together, rigid with fear, listening to the monitor, waiting for the clicks, waiting for the whispers, waiting for the voice. One desperate afternoon, Sarah went to the local library, searching for answers. She found old town records, dusty newspaper clippings. The house on Willow Creek Lane had a history. It had once belonged to a woman named Alara Thorne, a reclusive spinster who lived alone with a collection of antique dolls. The articles mentioned her eventual disappearance, deemed a runaway, but the tone of the articles was hushed, speculative. Local folklore whispered of strange noises coming from her house late at night, a woman's voice singing unsettling lullabies to unseen children. Sarah's blood ran cold. She remembered the distorted lullabies from the monitor. She remembered the doll collection. Lily had a few antique dolls in her nursery, gifts from a well-meaning aunt. She rushed home, her heart pounding. She found Mark in Lily's nursery, staring at the monitor with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He held Lily tightly, shielding her. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice trembling. It said her name." Sarah looked at the monitor. The screen showed Lily, still sleeping, but the audio was no longer just whispers. It was a low, raspy voice, drawing out each syllable, clear as day. "Lee, my sweet Lee." The voice was directly addressing their daughter. It was no longer interference. It was a presence, a malevolent, ancient presence that had been waiting, patiently, for a new child to arrive in its house. Mark called a priest. A kind, elderly man named Father Michael came to the house, his face etched with concern as Sarah and Mark, frantic and exhausted, explained everything. He listened to the recordings, his eyes widening. He performed a blessing, sprinkling holy water, reciting prayers. For a night, a blissful night, the monitor was silent. Sarah and Mark slept, truly slept, for the first time in weeks. They dared to hope. Maybe it was gone. Maybe Father Michael had driven it away. But the next night, at precisely 3:12 a.m., the clicks returned, followed by the whispers, followed by the voice. It wasn't angry. It sounded sad. A low, mournful sigh that seemed to resonate with an infinite loneliness. "They don't understand. Lee. They never understand." It wasn't just in the monitor anymore. They heard it from the walls, from the floorboards, from the very air around them. It permeated the house, a constant, chilling presence that clung to every shadow, every quiet corner. It wasn't just the monitor picking it up. It was the house itself. They fled. They packed only what they could, leaving most of their possessions, leaving the antique dolls in the nursery, leaving the house to whatever ancient, lonely spirit haunted its walls. They drove for hours, Lily safe and sound in her car seat, until the city lights were a distant memory and the sun began to rise. Now, they live in a new apartment, a modern, sterile place with no history, no creaking floorboards, no old energy. They sleep with Lily in their room, her crib right next to their bed. They don't use a baby monitor. They can hear every breath she takes, every tiny whimper. But sometimes, when Lily is finally asleep and the apartment is quiet, Sarah will hear a faint, almost imperceptible click. And Mark will sometimes wake, rigid with fear, convinced he heard a low, raspy whisper, a voice singing a mournful lullaby, just beyond the edge of hearing. They know it's still out there, waiting, searching. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is truly silent, they hear a faint, distant voice calling out, forever asking for its sweet Lily.